since I have gotten to see everybody face to face. Unfortunately, I'm having some technical issues today. I don't know what's wrong. My video doesn't work. And earlier on, people couldn't hear me. So, but in any case, I'd like to thank VST ECS for organizing this and, for giving me the opportunity to speak to everyone today. So it's really a pleasure. And I thought it would be a good timing to give everybody a quick update of what's happening with RSA. What are we seeing from a trends and a marketplace, and more importantly, I think what are we looking at moving forward. So if you sit through the whole presentation that I have today, and if there's nothing that you feel that you can take away from it, these are the three top key takeaways that I'd like you to take note of, and I think this is important. The first one is really there has never been a better time to be in the identity space, right? And I'll share with you a little bit on the statistics, the reasoning, why some of the researches that are done, and some of the trends that we are seeing in the marketplace today, especially with the customers as well, right? Two, I'll also share with you the reason why RSA is the best position to be a strategic advisor to a lot of your customers on the subject and the matter of identity and access management, right? And last but not least, I'll share with you what is RSA committed to and investing in growing this business throughout the upcoming years, and what are we looking at and how are we aligning ourselves to some of these market trends, all right? So these are the three key takeaways from today. If you forget everything else and you sit through the next 40 minutes, don't worry about it, because these are the three most important points that I'd like you to take away with you, right? Okay, so firstly around, why identity is now and never before, right? This is based on the Morgan Stanley research, and this is really for our partners. Today, Morgan Stanley looks at the identity space being about a $34 billion+ business, and it continues to grow, right? And this market is currently divided into two segments. Previously, as you all know, the identity and access management space has been typically talked about by the enterprise customers. So, be whether is it the banks, the financial institutions, the government, or even the large medium corporate enterprises. They've always talked about, being able to secure access of their identities and their employees and access to their resources. But, up and coming and what we're seeing is the need for digital identity and access management in the consumer space, right? The B2C space, right? As we know, we were forced upon over the last 1.5 years to do digital transformation. People have talked about digital transformation for a long time. And there were plans that people, corporates and enterprises were undergoing their digital transformation. What really forced everybody's hand was really the pandemic. On that note, I hope everybody is well and safe, and your family is well and safe. But really, the pandemic has really forced everyone not only to work from anywhere, but really to access resources that we typically would have to go into the office or be secured on a VPN or access certain limited resourcing through our corporate networks. But now we are being forced to do it from the nature of our own homes. And with that has also transformed how businesses interact with the customers, and therefore we are starting to see, as I will explain a little bit later on, our customers are starting to also engage their customers more digitally and giving them a lot more access to their resources online. All right, and further on, Morgan Stanley did this survey of security spans across enterprises. And number one, from a priority standpoint, is identity and access management across all the chief information security officers. However, a lot of organizations and chief information security officers are looking at three key areas, right? It's no longer your two-factor authentication. Yeah, to some extent, there may be certain situations that they will want to secure it using a two-factor authentication. But increasingly, people are seeking a more modern way of authentication. Also, the strategy towards a zero trust policy, whereby you are not going to trust everybody, and there's no trust placed on anybody that signs in or access any of the solutions. And the last but not least, it's really the moving towards passwordless, right? And later on, I'll share with you a little bit more of why passwordless and what are the downsides of passwords. Okay, so what do customers think of Secure ID? I know some of you on this call, and I recognize through your names, are very familiar with RSA and the Secure ID portfolio. And here is one of the reasons why, as I mentioned earlier on, RSA is in the best position to be the trusted advisor when it comes to identity and access management. Because we have been doing this for over 40 years right now, right? And across the 40 years, we have been in the forefront of not only providing authentication, but providing secure accesses as well as identity management. So if you look at multiple junctions, not only did we invent the RSA algorithm, but we also went on and evolved it and to use the new and modern technologies, such as, for example, if you look at 2011, we were the first one to introduce risk-based authentication for the enterprises. And then, moving on downwards to even just last year where we introduced passwordless QR codes, FIDO2 in 2019. These were really cutting edge at that time, although many of the customers were still using our traditional two-factor authentication, right? And if we talk about cloud, we have been doing cloud since 2015, which very, very few people knows about it. Because when we first introduced in 2015, the concept and the idea of cloud authentication and cloud identity and access management, people were still not fully embarked on the cloud journey, right? They were looking at it, they were contemplating, there was still a lot of talk around the hybrid, but really people weren't going towards the cloud. Of course, what transformed and what changed all of that, as you'll see later on, was in 2020, people were forced to use the cloud. Forced because I say that overnight, suddenly you have to implement solutions that were not there to enable remote access, to enable the workforce to adapt to the working environments remotely. And the fastest way to do that is really to embark on a SaaS and a cloud solution. And suddenly, you have an influx of people embarking on a cloud solution. Then lies the question of, then how do you secure those accesses, right? So I believe most of you would have seen this and are very familiar with this. As you see on the right-hand side, down at the bottom, that's our traditional Secure ID hardware two-factor authentication. We have been the gold standard of authentication, identity and access management for the last 40 years, right? And most of you would see that hardware token being synonymous with RSA. And from a credibility standpoint and from a credential standpoint today, we manage over 25,000 customers and over 50+ million identities across the world, right? And if you talk about from an industry perspective, we literally serve, I would say easily the top 15 to the top 20 of all of the sectors, be whether it's the government, manufacturing, financial institutions, most of them are a RSA customer, or if not, I would say in some sectors all, right? So having said that, how has those evolved since the days that we introduced the hardware token. So definitely over the last year and a half or so, things have transformed dramatically. I talked about digital transformation being forced onto us. I talked about the cloud adoption being accelerated simply because people are being forced to work from home, are being forced to work remotely, the need to access company and corporate resources remotely. But having said that, while we focus on the enterprises, the enterprise was also forced to help the customers transform, meaning a lot of the organizations have subsequently launched online services and e-services to enable the customers to embark their daily transactions or their daily routines through a digital format. That wasn't easy for a lot of medium-sized organizations and corporations. They had to really leapfrog and jump ahead, and therefore, the need of embarking onto a SaaS solution was very, very appealing to them at that point of time. And suddenly they have a whole slew of cloud and SaaS solutions, right? And of course, with the increased amount of what I call the work from home phenomenon, definitely the attack surface has grown. And with that, because the lines between your personal life and your work and how you respond digitally has now kind of blurred and intermingled with itself, right? So people that were used to doing certain things in their personal life would then, take that behaviors and adopt that in their corporate life, especially working from home. So we have seen an increased number of phishing attempts and attacks on organizations across the board. So it started off, with your financial institutions, and then it went broad-based to everyone else, and then it went to the healthcare industry. You name it, it has been increasing. And the main theme of this phishing, if you look at the reports that are out there, the main theme of the phishing was all around the pandemic and COVID-19, right? Because that was really a key theme and a hot theme that the hackers found and the cyber criminals found very useful in getting people's attention and getting people to click on things. Of course, with the increased workforce and the increased risk because of the adoption of technologies, the regulators and the compliance requirements did not ease off, right? In fact, in many of the countries that we know, the regulators have further imposed further sanctions and further regulatory policies to safeguard and govern the cybersecurity hygiene and practices of some of the organizations that they operate and the industries that organizations operate in. So a good example would be the banking of financial institutions, right? They always had that regulatory governance and policies, but because of the increase of remote workforce, many central banks have now introduced newer policies and updated their policies to enable remote workforce and making sure that financial institutions secure that remote workforce. Same thing for the healthcare industries, right? The frontline workers, while they may be at the front line, a lot of the backroom staffs are still working remotely. And because they have access to very sensitive information, the health authorities are enforcing such new policies. And we've seen a number of that happen across time, right? And if we looked at 1.5 years down the road, and this is an extract from today, and when we talk to the customers and what are their key initiatives and what are their plans moving forward, with the pandemic, and we all know that COVID-19 is here to stay, right? Maybe to a certain extent as we go on the years, but we definitely know that this will be the new phenomenon, this will be a new norm. We will have to live with COVID-19 and the idea of remote digital as well as the increased compliance. And so we asked, what would those key initiatives be for the businesses and the organizations? So definitely the number one that came out was the convenience, right? Because again, people are now seeing that work and the lines between work and personal being blurred, that they have the same expectations in, for example, authenticating any one of their personal apps or their personal credentials, similarly to that of the corporate and the enterprises, right? I've talked about remote workforce. I've talked about moving to the cloud. Identity assurance is a big one because suddenly with the adoption of the cloud and having used both a hybrid of solutions, being with the cloud as well as on-prem solutions, how do you ensure that the person who is accessing the data is the right person, right? And of course, from a corporate standpoint, how to ensure governance that these accesses are reviewed regularly and to ensure that they're kept up to date so that no one is denied of any resources, neither is anyone overprivileged of any resources. And of course, you've heard significantly the talk about the zero trust security model. And this is something that I'd like to highlight. Zero trust is not a product, it's a strategy, it's a security model. While authentication and identity access management plays and figures heavily in that zero trust security model, no one single product is able to say or to be claimed that they are fully compliant with zero trust because again, it is a strategy and it's not a product. All right. Okay, moving along. So why multi-factor authentication? Speaking to a lot of customers and speaking to a lot of partners will then ask me, why are customers looking at multi-factor authentication? The first thing that comes to mind to a lot of people and a lot of customers these days and a lot of organizations is password sucks. And here is why password sucks, right? Because it's easily breached, and we've seen that through statistics, right? 81% of breaches are, and again, 81 is just based on the 2017 report. There are further statistics that show closer to 90 and 90+% of breaches are due to either weak credentials, stolen identities, right? And from a user perspective, I know many people, talking to many people would reuse passwords for multiple applications, right? Because the human mind can only take so many number of passwords that you can remember. So most people would either use common passwords or reuse the passwords, right, in the applications that they access. So, if a particular credential gets breached on one certain site, the cyber criminals and the hackers is going to use those same credentials and they're going to try on the other sites that you have accesses to, right? And that's where, it'll lead to further breaches as we have seen in the past, right? The other thing is, this is just taking a poll from, the survey that we went out to the various organizations. The heaviest call center volume and this was pre-pandemic, right? This was way back. This was even pre-pandemic. Pre-pandemic was already at 40% of the call volume was due to password resets, right? And post-pandemic, I suspect that this number increased significantly because having spoken to a lot of customers have said, suddenly the call volumes have increased. People have been asking to reset the passwords because they either forgotten it or they haven't accessed it for a long time, blah blah blah. That has always been or that has been the case, right? And this simply just adds up to the total cost of ownership, right? No doubt about it. So that's the reason why the word passwordless has been really a significant term that has been widely used over the last 1.5 years, where people are looking to do away with passwords. The next reason why that passwords are no longer valid for a lot of these instances is because if we look at an identity and access ecosystem, right? So first I'll talk about the left, which is the corporate employees. They're not only accessing the on-premise solutions, which is your traditional on-premise solution, but they're also starting to use the cloud solutions. And of course, the cloud solutions would have adopted different protocols, different authentication methods, and so on and so forth. I think what's important over the last 1.5 years, we have seen organizations wanting a seamless platform to enable accesses both cloud as well as on-prem solutions. Not denying that cloud is going to be the way forward and majority of the applications will start moving to the cloud. But there's always the situation of certain on-premise solutions that will still remain. And I think what's important as an identity platform is to be able to serve users from both aspects. And it doesn't have to be a single authentication method that you use to serve both the users from both, right? You could use a varied, and our customers are asking for a varied of authentication methods to serve different types of users within the organizations. Like I mentioned earlier on, what's interesting is also organizations are looking to provide the same level of identity and access management to either their customers or their vendors accessing their networks, right? And again, this could be cloud solutions, this could be certain on-prem solutions, whatever it may be. And from everywhere, from digital banking, from online shopping, which has just, I believe everybody is shopping online right now. We've just taken such an increase in number of transactions to really accessing telemedicine and telehealthcare services, right? Suddenly everybody or suddenly businesses have allowed their customers to access a lot of the resources online, and they are looking to implement identity and access management solutions to safeguard the users' profiles and the users' identities and the users' personal data and private information, right? And having said that, I'd like to jump into the Secure ID today and looking at those different dynamics and what's coming together. How is Secure ID positioned to help customers? So the first thing, we talk about the modern authentication. And as mentioned earlier, today, Secure ID is the only platform that allows a varied number of authentication methods to allow different users in the organizations to suit their convenience and their privileges when accessing either corporate resources or have customers access online services from the organizations, right? I would say no other vendor today provides a very varied amount of authentication methods as compared to the Secure ID platform from RSA, right? And having said that, with FIDO2, with the introduction of FIDO2, RSA have also introduced the passwordless journey, right? Where, I know, most of you would have maybe started embarking on Windows for Hello for Business to allow passwordless, but majority of the people would not have done that, right? RSA brings you that capability to natively allow passwordless authentication, even without Windows Hello for Business, right? So it's already inbuilt into the solution. We do not charge you extra, and yet we bring you a step further and a step closer to your passwordless journey. So with FIDO2, right? And again, with FIDO2, it could be a hardware-based FIDO2 token, and later on in the year, we are releasing a mobile-based FIDO2 authentication, which we will share in due time. So that's authentication, right? Next, then we take a look on the right, which is access management, right? And I cannot today talk about any technology solutions, or people will not talk about any technology solutions if two words don't come up, right? One is cloud, which I have introduced and talked a lot about today. But the other one is around AI and ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning, right? That seems to be the buzzword. But one of the things that I'll like to introduce is the concept of risk-based, right? And risk-based authentication. And that's really the quadrant on the right, right? And if you look at the quadrant on the right, we have using the risk-based approach using, I won't call it artificial intelligence, but really using machine learning and using predictive analytics to assess the risk of accesses to the environment so that you can really have the people authenticate and give you identity assurance to say who's accessing the right resources and who they say they are coming into the environment, right? So again, it's based on machine learning, based on multiple factors. We have something called a risk-based authentication, which is adaptive in nature and which allows you to provide further granular details on how you want to authenticate a user coming in, right? Whether is it based on behavior, based on location, and a combination of those will increase the risk factors. And you can say, okay, if it's of such nature and the risk factor is of a certain scoring, and I would want to step up that authentication through whatever method it may be, right? Biometrics, mobile OTP or SMS or whatever it is, right? The third thing on the bottom left that I would like to cover, it's really the credential management. So today, we have to look at three key areas. And this is even more so and more important because since everyone is working from home, an employee simply can't just go to his administrator and say, hey, can you reset my password? Can you provision a token for me? Can you provision remote access for me? That seems very, very, not impossible, but it seems very difficult these days. And then you throw in the factor of third parties, your subcontractors, your suppliers accessing, it makes it even more complex. I think what's important is, like I mentioned earlier on, is really to have a centralized platform that allows employees to not only provide self-service, that, they don't have to not only inconvenience the administrators, inconvenience the call centers, but empowering them to be able to provision the necessary authentication methods themselves, right? I know for a fact, like in Singapore, people change mobile phones all the time. And can you imagine if, if you have an organization in Singapore and, users change their mobile phones, say once every 1.5 years, 2 years, the amount of administrative load on the organization will be very, very heavy, right? So what a lot of the customers in Singapore have done is they have introduced a self-service provisioning. So when they change the mobile phones, they can simply scan a QR code and then have that mobile token provision across to them, right? So that's one, right? Or some people would have used the mobile MFA from RSA in their environment, and again, same thing, right? They would download the mobile app, and then instantly, with their necessary credentials, instantly be able to gain access without even going to the call center, without even troubling the administrators. Similarly for third parties, right? So whether is it a secure third party where you want to introduce maybe something more than just SMS, maybe because it's of sensitive in nature, like we know some government contractors, then you may want to introduce a more secure way of authenticating. Right, and then let me talk about the last quadrant, which is important and which sometimes people tend to overlook, and really that's the breadth of integration and the depth of integration with a lot of the third parties. Today, I mean, this is just a few names that we put up, but if you look at it, it's a mixture of both on-prem products as well as cloud service providers, right? Today, RSA has about more than 500 plus integrations with third parties, which is important because you do not want to go into identity and access management where you do not have the depth and the breadth of those integrations, because then you'll be constantly doing those API integrations, and that will cause maintenance issues down the road, and then it will cause upgrading issues and so on and so forth. So it's going to be a major hassle, right? A lot of customers have found that the 500 plus integrations that we have in our networks of technology partners today has served them very well and has been very helpful in them adopting new technologies, as well as lower the total cost of ownership, all in the longer term, right? So when the pandemic broke out, suddenly they had to bring on board a whole slew of new solutions. That was when they realized the value of RSA Secure ID, because when they had brought on board those solutions, RSA Secure ID had already those integration with those solutions, and instantly that could be used in the environment to authenticate to the new services that they were provisioning for. All right. So again, like I say, if we go back to the slide, the 2 slides before, addressing the employees and the corporate networks and addressing the customers, really what we need today and what a lot of customers are looking for, it's a central identity platform, right? To not only provide the authentication, the integrations, the lifecycle and assurance, as well as the access controls and the necessary single sign-ons, right? While later on, I'll show you the various flavors of Secure ID and how we address the various customer environments and the customer situations accordingly, right? So like I said, we are the trusted advisor. We have been the trusted advisor, and we'll carry on being the trusted advisor. We know that many people are driving towards the cloud, but again, we have seen major cloud vendors, failing on their cloud. And can you imagine if your authentication solution was on the cloud that failed? What would be that backup? So you don't want to go into the office one morning and say, you have a whole bunch of people calling you and say, I can't access the network, I can't access the resources, and the company goes down, right? So apart from the cloud, and I'll share later on, apart from the cloud, RSA is probably the only unique provider that provides a hybrid authentication and identity and access management platform. So while cloud may be a primary, you could have an on-premise failover so that when the cloud is not available, people still can go around their daily routine by using an offline authentication method, right? Like the OTP. So it's been tested, it's been proven, and today we have, the largest financial institutions in Australia using it, and plus further other, other industries and other customers that I unfortunately can't name on this call, and we can have conversation later on, right? As I mentioned earlier on, tested, proven 500 plus integration, no doubt about it. And that gives empowerment to our users, right? To be able to quickly adapt and adopt new technologies as they deem fit at that point of time. So providing agility, it's a key priority for us to our customers. I talked about flexibility earlier on, right? Provide a range of modern authentication methods, including traditional authentication methods. We're not ignoring that there are certain use cases that people would still use traditional classic authentication methods. So we cater for a variety of users and a variety of use cases. And that's why today we still provide about 50 million plus identities, the largest market share, I would say, out there in the world, right? And of course, the last part is convenience, right? The ability to either adopt a cloud, a hybrid, on-prem, is really up to the choice is endless, right? It's really up to the customer and what they deem fit, what suits their environment, and the ability to customize and optimize the platforms, be whether is it policies, be whether is it workflows. Really, we allow the convenience for customers to do what's necessary for their environment without hindering the performances, without hindering the business objectives, and without hindering any of the use cases that they may have in mind. Okay, so like I say, everybody knows the traditional secure ID that's on-premise. Some people call it the two-factor authentication, and so on and so forth. That has been a long-standing. As I say, we have progressed. For certain larger organizations, we do provide a hybrid solution because they need that high availability and the resiliency. Well, resiliency is another key word that is being thrown around these days. So, when the cloud is not available, or like in the Philippines, all of you would know, sometimes you go into the remote areas and you do not have accesses to internet, you do not have accesses to cellular signals. Yeah, you need to fall back on the offline authentication method. So many customers today still look forward to a hybrid because that provides, a high availability to their employees and sometimes even their customers, right? And of course, if you want to go 100% cloud, we have the option available for customers who want to go cloud first, right? So again, the platform is fully cloud enabled, and you could use any one of our authentication methods through the cloud platform, solely on the cloud platform only. All right. Okay, so the last bit I want to talk about, and in my earlier slide, as part of the 3 key takeaways, is the investments, right? As you know, RSA is now a standalone company. We are being divested, or we have been divested away from Dell, and we continue to invest in this portfolio of solutions because there are a significant need for our customers, depending on us, to continue to innovate and to continue to provide them with the endless support and the services that we've continued to provide them across the years and through the times of difficulty like the pandemic, right? So we continue to invest in new modern ways of authentication, whether is it passwordless or is it risk-based. That means really around zero trust. You trust nobody. You based on the risk factors, you will then be authenticated or you will be challenged, right? And a full range of cloud MFA options. So we'll continue to invest in the modernization of the authentication methods, following in line with what consumers are releasing, or like the likes of Apple are releasing, the likes of Samsung are releasing. So we will continue to do that, right? As we say, the lines between the personal life and the work life is being blurred. We'll continue to try and make the Secure ID platform as seamless an experience to our customers and their end users and their customers as much as possible, right? So we want, we continue to have a modern, unified experience so that, whether are they authenticating personally or are they authenticating through a corporate network, they have that same seamless experience, and it's, nothing too different, right? We talked about the journey to the cloud. I don't think I need to talk about that. Yes, we continue to invest in the cloud, but being mindful that we do still have customers requiring a hybrid approach because they want that high availability made available to them, because the last thing they want is coming into the office and half of the employees or 3/4 of the employees is not able to access any of the corporate resources that they require for their work, right? And I think what's important is also the channels, and I think this is the most apt timing for me to talk about the channel, because as we become an independent company, naturally we are going to invest in the necessary resources to make us successful, but we're not going to be able to invest in every single place, right, as much as the investments that we make. And that's where the channel partners becomes extremely important for us, because the areas that we are not operating in, or the areas that we do not have sufficient resources, we are going to depend a lot on the channels. So for example, the Philippines is a very, very good example, right? we are not everywhere in the Philippines, we will definitely depend on you as channel partners to take our offerings to the customers, to spread the word out, to get the awareness done, as we want to try and make the whole community being more secure as the internet penetration increases. Right? Okay. So on that closing note, I would like to thank you everyone for your time, and I would like everybody to stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you very much.